I am Marina Thompson, 32 years old, daughter of the respected Dr. Harold Thompson. All my life, I never quite measured up to what my family expected. When I received an invitation to my father's retirement party after years of minimal contact, I felt a glimmer of hope for reconciliation. Instead, in front of 200 guests, my father called me the biggest disgrace to this family. What he never expected was my calm response that left everyone breathless. If you have ever been the family disappointment, you know how this feels. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like button as I share how I finally stood up for myself after years of emotional abuse. Growing up in Westview Heights, the most affluent neighborhood in our town, I was surrounded by success and expectations. Our Tudor-style home with its manicured lawn and imposing facade was a physical manifestation of what the Thompson family represented to the community. My father, Harold Thompson, was not just any doctor. He was chief of cardiology at Westview Memorial, published in leading medical journals and respected by everyone in our social circle. His patients adored him for his skilled hands that saved countless lives. The irony that those same hands could not heal the fractures in his own family was not lost on me. My mother Elizabeth played her role perfectly. The quintessential doctor's wife, she hosted charity galas, sat on hospital boards, and maintained our family's social calendar with military precision. With her pearls and perfect blowout, she was the epitome of upper-middle-class success. When introducing us to others, she always mentioned my father's latest achievement or my brother's academic prowess before acknowledging my existence. James, my older brother by 4 years, was the golden child from day one. He brought home straight. As captained the debate team and knew by age 12 that he would follow our father into medicine. Every family dinner conversation revolved around medical breakthroughs, hospital politics, or James's progress through his advanced placement science courses. Then there was me. From my earliest memories, I was drawn to colors, shapes, and capturing the world through different lenses. When I was 7, I spent my birthday money on a disposable camera, instead of the science kit my parents had subtly suggested. The disappointment on my father's face when I showed him my photographs of neighborhood cats and interesting cloud formations still stings when I think about it. "Marina, sweetheart, these are nice," he had said, barely glancing at them, "but perhaps you should focus more on your mathematics. Your teacher mentioned you are falling behind." I was not falling behind. I had scored 89% on my last test, but James had always scored in the high 90s, setting an impossible standard. As I entered middle school, my artistic interests only grew stronger. I joined the school newspaper as a photographer and spent hours in the art room after classes. My art teacher, Mrs. Davis, was the first adult who saw genuine talent in my work. She entered one of my photographs in a regional youth contest without telling me. When I won second place, I rushed home, clutching my certificate, hoping for validation. "That is lovely, dear," my mother said, distantly placing the certificate on the refrigerator where it was quickly buried under James's perfect test scores and science fair announcements. My father merely nodded before returning to his medical journal. By high school, I had learned to hide my passion. I maintained a respectable GPA, joined acceptable extracurricular activities, and kept my photography private. The constant subtle dismissals had planted deep seeds of anxiety and self-doubt. I second-guessed every decision, wondering if I was fundamentally flawed for not fitting the Thompson mold. During my sophomore year, I experienced my first panic attack after receiving a B+ on a chemistry test, not because I cared about the grade, but because I knew the disappointment it would trigger at home. I locked myself in a bathroom stall, gasping for breath, terrified of facing my father. That night at dinner, he lectured me for 30 minutes about the importance of scientific literacy, while James offered to tutor me with a condescending smile. My graduation from high school should have been a celebration. I had maintained a 3.8 GPA, served as yearbook editor, and been accepted to several good colleges. At my graduation dinner, after spending 20 minutes praising James for being accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical School, my father finally turned to me. "Marina has done adequately as well," he said, raising his glass half-heartedly. "The state university has a decent liberal arts program, I suppose. Though I still think pre-med would have been a more appropriate choice." That night alone in my room, I made a decision that would widen the gulf between us permanently. I declined my acceptance to State University and instead accepted the offer from the prestigious Hartwell College of Arts, known for its exceptional photography program. When I announced this at breakfast the next morning, my father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You will not waste your potential and my money on some art hobby," he declared, slamming his fist on the table. "Either you pursue a practical degree or you are on your own." I remember my mother's silent tears and James's uncomfortable stare as I stood my ground for the first time in my life. "Then I will be on my own," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. That summer was the beginning of my exile from the Thompson family identity. I was permitted to live at home, but the atmosphere was frigid. My parents spoke to me only when necessary, and James avoided being alone with me, unwilling to choose sides. When August arrived and I packed my belongings for Hartwell, I knew I was crossing a threshold from which there would be no easy return. Hartwell College was a revelation. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who saw beauty in shadow and light, who valued expression over prestige. For the first time, I could breathe freely without the suffocating weight of disapproval following me everywhere. My freshman dormitory became my first true home. My roommate Rachel Chen was a sculpture major from California who laughed loudly and unapologetically, took up space in a way I had never allowed myself to do. Through her, I met Sofia Alvarez, a brilliant photographer whose work focused on family dynamics and cultural identity. They became the first people who truly saw me. "Your composition is incredible," Sofia told me after viewing my portfolio during our first photography seminar. "You have this way of capturing loneliness even in crowded spaces. It is haunting." Her words validated what I had always felt but never articulated. My photography was not just a hobby or a rebellion, it was my voice. While my technical skills improved under the guidance of Professor Martin, I also began to find my artistic perspective. I was drawn to capturing moments of authentic connection between people, perhaps because such moments had been so rare in my own family. My first major project, a series titled Invisible Threads, featured strangers who resembled family members interacting in public spaces. It earned me the department's Freshman Achievement Award. I called home to share the news foolishly, hoping for some acknowledgement. "That is nice, Marina," my mother said flatly. "Did you get the care package I sent? There were some multivitamins in there. You sound tired." My father did not come to the phone. Without family financial support, I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover expenses not included in my scholarship. I served coffee at the campus cafe from 6 to 9 a.m., worked at the library circulation desk between classes, and photographed local events on weekends. The exhaustion was constant, but so was the sense of ownership over my life. During sophomore year, I met Alex Ramirez, a film student with intense eyes and passionate opinions about visual storytelling. Our connection was immediate and deep. On our third date, as we wandered through an obscure photography exhibit downtown, he asked about my family. "They do not understand me," I said, simply the practiced response I had developed. "Show me your work," he replied, "and I will understand you." That night in his apartment, I showed him my entire portfolio, including the personal projects I had never displayed in class. He looked at each photograph with careful attention, asking questions about my process and inspiration. When he finished, he took my hands in his. "You see the world differently," he said. "That is a gift, not a flaw. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." For the 2 years we were together, Alex was my champion and safe harbor. He attended every exhibition, challenged me to push boundaries in my work, and never once suggested I should be anything other than exactly who I was. When he received a film fellowship in Berlin, after graduation, we reluctantly agreed to part ways, but his belief in me had helped rebuild what my family had systematically torn down. My junior and senior years at Hartwell were a time of rapid artistic growth. I specialized in documentary photography with a focus on family dynamics across cultures. Perhaps it was my way of processing my own family trauma, examining through my lens what healthy and unhealthy relationships looked like. When I graduated with honors, my thesis exhibition received attention from several small galleries. Only my mother attended the ceremony, sitting stiffly in her designer suit. Leaving immediately after, without seeing my displayed work. James sent a generic congratulations text. My father sent nothing. The years that followed established my career trajectory. I moved to a tiny apartment in the city and worked as a photographer's assistant while building my portfolio. Slowly, my name gained recognition in certain circles. I documented marginalized communities for nonprofit organizations, had my work featured in social justice campaigns, and eventually began receiving commissions from smaller magazines. Each tiny success felt enormous to me, each publication a validation that I had made the right choice. Yet the hole left by my family's absence remained. Every achievement came with the bittersweet knowledge that the people whose approval I had sought for so long would never give it. Family gatherings became increasingly rare and tense affairs. I attended Christmas dinners and occasional birthdays where conversation remained superficial and strained. My parents inquired about my photography hobby with the same tone they might use to discuss a slightly embarrassing medical condition. The contrast between my family's perception of my career and the reality became almost comical. The same week, a major arts magazine published my photo essay on generational trauma. My mother called to ask if I had considered taking courses in medical office administration as something to fall back on. The final straw came during what should have been a shared celebration. My first major gallery show coincided with James's graduation from his medical residency. When I mentioned the conflict in dates, my mother did not hesitate. Well, of course we will be at James's graduation. This is a milestone in his career, Marina. I am sure your little exhibition can be visited another time. My little exhibition had been covered by National Arts Press. The gallery had sold out opening night, but in the Thompson family hierarchy, it would always be insignificant compared to anything related to medicine. After that, I pulled back further. I called less frequently, visited only when absolutely necessary, and protected myself by expecting nothing. I built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who celebrated my successes and supported me through failures. For nearly 2 years, I maintained only the most minimal contact with my parents and brother, which is why the thick cream envelope containing an invitation to my father's retirement party came as such a surprise. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in March. Heavy cardstock with gold embossing announced the Westview Memorial Hospital Board of Directors requests the honor of your presence at a retirement celebration honoring the distinguished career of Dr. Harold Thompson. I stared at it for a long time, sitting on the floor of my apartment amid the scattered mail. Why now? After years of minimal contact, why include me in this significant moment? A dangerous flutter of hope stirred in my chest. Perhaps at this milestone there might be room for reconciliation. Perhaps my father, facing the end of his professional identity, had gained some perspective on what truly mattered. I called Sophia, immediately needing an outside perspective. It could be a peace offering, she said cautiously when I described the invitation. Or it could be your mother, ensuring all appearances are maintained for their social circle. Do you think I should go? I asked, tracing the embossed letters with my fingertip. Only if you can go with zero expectations, Sophia replied, her voice gentle but firm. You cannot control how they will treat you, only how you respond. I spent a week considering the invitation, turning it over in my mind during sleepless nights. Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect the fragile peace I had built. Another part, the little girl still desperate for her father's approval, whispered that this might be the last chance to heal old wounds. Finally, I RSVP'd yes, but with conditions I set for myself. I would attend as the successful professional I had become, not the insecure daughter seeking validation. I would be polite, but distant. I would not expect miracles. The weeks before the party were filled with preparation, both practical and emotional. I spent an entire Saturday shopping for the perfect outfit, eventually selecting a tailored black jumpsuit that projected confidence and artistic sophistication without trying too hard. I had my hair cut into a sleek bob that framed my face and made me look more mature. I prepared business cards knowing my father's colleagues might include potential clients. Most importantly, I selected a gift that represented both thoughtfulness and boundary setting. I commissioned a custom leather portfolio with my father's initials containing a carefully curated selection of my most acclaimed photographs. It was both personal and professional, acknowledging our connection while asserting my success in the path he had dismissed. I also prepared mentally, working with my therapist on strategies for maintaining emotional equilibrium when facing my family's potential dismissiveness. We practiced responses to likely scenarios and identified triggers that might send me spiraling back into old patterns of seeking approval. Remember, Dr. Fisher told me during our final session before the event, you are not responsible for their inability to appreciate your path. Their limitations are not your failure. As the date approached, I arranged to stay with my childhood friend Kristen rather than at my parents' house. Kristen had remained a constant in my life, despite the distance, one of the few connections to my hometown that brought comfort rather than pain. Her guest room became my sanctuary, a neutral space where I could retreat if the family interactions became too intense. The day before the party, I drove the 3 hours back to my hometown, watching familiar landmarks appear. The exit sign for Westview Heights, the hospital where my father had spent more time than at home, the park where James and I had played as children before our paths diverged so dramatically. Each sight triggered memories, some pleasant, many painful. Kristen welcomed me with a warm hug and takeout from our favorite high school hangout spot. We spent the evening catching up on her teaching career and my latest projects, carefully avoiding too much discussion of the next day's event. Before bed, she squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you have built an amazing life on your terms," she said. "No one can take that away from you." That night, I barely slept, rehearsing scenarios in my mind. Would my father acknowledge me publicly? Would my mother maintain her cool politeness? Would James and I find any common ground after years of growing apart? I practiced breathing exercises and repeated affirmations until dawn began to lighten the sky. The morning of the party, I took extra care with my appearance. My makeup was flawless, professional, but with the slightly artistic edge that had become my signature. I secured my shoulder-length bob behind one ear with a small silver clip, revealing the 3 tiny earrings that climbed up my cartilage. My jumpsuit fit perfectly, and I added a statement necklace, featuring a silver camera pendant, a gift from Sophia on my 30th birthday. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the confident woman who stared back at me. She looked nothing like the insecure girl who had left this town a decade ago with tear-stained cheeks and shaking hands. Yet beneath the polished exterior, that same girl's fears still whispered. Kristen drove me to the Westview Country Club, squeezing my hand reassuringly before I stepped out of the car. The building loomed, all stone columns and sweeping staircases, a temple to the kind of old-money success my parents had always aspired to join. At the entrance, a young woman with a clipboard checked my name with a practiced smile. "You are Dr. Thompson's daughter. How wonderful your family is already inside." Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the double doors into the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in one corner. At the front, a podium stood ready for speeches, flanked by large photographs documenting my father's medical career. My mother spotted me first, her eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise, perhaps at my polished appearance or the fact that I had actually shown up. She glided over, champagne flute in hand, and air kissed near my cheek. "Marina, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting she had expected otherwise. "What an interesting outfit. Very creative." The slight emphasis on creative carried its usual subtle judgment. "Hello, Mother," I replied evenly. "The party looks lovely. Congratulations to Dad on his retirement." "Yes, well, 35 years of service deserves recognition," she said, glancing around. "James and Diana are by the bar. You should say hello. And your father is speaking with the hospital board members. He will be quite busy, so do not take it personally if he does not have much time for chit-chat." Before I could respond, she was called away by the event coordinator, leaving me alone amid clusters of my parents' friends and colleagues. I made my way to the bar where James stood with his wife Diana, both looking the part of successful medical professionals in their designer clothes and perfect posture. "Marina," James said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, as he leaned in for a brief hug. "Good to see you. Diana, you remember my sister?" Diana nodded coolly. We had met only twice at their wedding 4 years ago and at a tense Christmas dinner the following year. "Of course. You take photographs, right?" "I am a documentary photographer," I corrected gently. My work was recently featured in National Geographic's special issue on urban family structures. How fascinating, Diana replied with the practiced interest of someone who had no intention of engaging further. James just received a research grant for his work on pediatric cardiac anomalies, the youngest doctor in the department's history to secure independent funding. And so, it began the familiar pattern of redirection and comparison that had defined my family interactions for years. I sipped my champagne and nodded appropriately, feeling the old insecurities beginning to surface despite my preparation. As the evening progressed, the ballroom filled with the elite of Westview's medical community. Department heads mingled with hospital administrators. Nurses who had worked with my father for decades shared stories of his dedication. Former patients arrived to pay tribute to the man who had saved their lives. I moved through the crowd, introducing myself when necessary, accepting condescending comments about my artistic pursuits with a fixed smile. To these people, I was merely an addendum to the Thompson legacy, a curious deviation from the expected path. "So you are Harold's daughter," said an elderly surgeon peering at me over his glasses, "the one who did not go into medicine." "That is right," I replied pleasantly. "I document human experiences through photography instead." "Interesting hobby," he said, already looking past me for someone more important to engage with. "It is my profession, actually," I corrected, but he had already moved on. This interaction repeated with slight variations throughout the cocktail hour. My father's colleagues either dismissed my career entirely or expressed patronizing interests that barely masked their confusion about why anyone would choose art over medicine. "Just taking pictures, eh?" chuckled a ruddy-faced cardiologist. "Must be nice to have such a relaxing career while the rest of us are saving lives." I bit back the response that my recent documentary project on emergency room workers had actually highlighted the sacrifices made by medical professionals like him. Instead, I smiled and excused myself, moving toward the display of my father's accomplishments near the front of the room. The tribute wall featured photographs from throughout his career. My father in medical school looking serious and determined. Receiving his first white coat. Standing proudly outside the hospital on his first day as an attending physician. Performing groundbreaking surgery. Accepting awards. Always the same expression of grave competence, the same squared shoulders bearing the weight of his important work. I was searching for any photo that might include our family when my mother appeared at my elbow. "They are about to serve dinner," she said. "You are at table 3 with your brother and some of the younger doctors." "Not at the family table," I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Your father thought it would be good for you to network," she replied smoothly. "These connections could be useful for you, Marina." Translation: I was not central enough to the celebration to warrant a place at the main table. Even at this event, I was being sidelined, an inconvenient reminder of the imperfection in their perfect family narrative. Dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. I picked at my salmon while the young doctors at my table discussed medical jargon that might as well have been a foreign language. James occasionally tried to include me with questions about my latest projects, but his attention quickly returned to shop talk with his colleagues. After the main course, the speeches began. The hospital director praised my father's contributions to cardiology. Former residents testified to his demanding but excellent mentorship. Colleagues shared anecdotes about his diagnostic brilliance and steady hands in the operating room. When James took the podium, the room fell respectfully silent. My golden brother, the true heir to the Thompson legacy, stood tall and confident as he spoke about growing up watching our father's dedication to medicine. "From my earliest memories, I knew I wanted to follow in his footsteps," James said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "He showed me that medicine is not just a career, but a calling. The Thompson name has become synonymous with excellence in cardiology, and I am proud to continue that tradition." Not once did he mention that there was another Thompson child present. Not once did he acknowledge that our family consisted of more than just this unbroken line of medical men. I was erased from the narrative so completely that several people at my table glanced at me in confusion, perhaps wondering why I shared the honored doctor's last name at all. As servers cleared dessert plates and poured more wine, I noticed my father drinking more heavily than usual. His normally composed demeanor had given way to a slightly louder voice, a slightly looser posture. He clapped colleagues on the back and laughed more freely than I had seen in years. Perhaps retirement was already lifting some of the rigid self-control that had defined him. I decided this might be my only opportunity to present my gift before he became too caught up in celebrations. Gathering my courage, I approached the main table, the carefully wrapped portfolio tucked under my arm. "Dad," I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue after so much distance. "I wanted to give you something to mark the occasion." He turned, surprise flickering across his face as though he had forgotten I was there. Before he could respond, the event coordinator tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats, Dr. Thompson will now give his retirement address." My father stood straightening his tie. "Later, Marina," he said dismissively, moving toward the podium without accepting the gift in my hands. I returned to my seat, clutching the package that represented so much more than just a retirement present. It was my final attempt at building a bridge, and he had walked away without even looking at it. As my father took his place at the podium, the room fell silent. He looked every inch the distinguished physician, silver hair, perfectly combed posture, impeccable, despite the slight flush of alcohol on his cheeks. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate this milestone." He began, his public speaking voice smooth and authoritative. 35 years at Westview Memorial has been the honor of my lifetime." He proceeded to thank mentors, colleagues, and hospital administration. He acknowledged the sacrifices required for medical excellence and spoke movingly about particularly challenging cases that had shaped his career. As his speech continued, I began to relax slightly. Perhaps the evening would end without incident after all. Then he turned to family acknowledgments. "None of my success would have been possible without the support of my wonderful wife, Elizabeth," he said, raising his glass toward my mother, who inclined her head gracefully. "Her patience and unwavering support created the stable foundation that allowed me to focus on my work." He paused, taking another sip of his drink. "And my son, James. From the moment he first picked up my stethoscope as a child, I knew the Thompson medical legacy would continue in capable hands. His recent research grant is just the beginning of what I know will be an illustrious career, exceeding even my own achievements." The crowd applauded, and James nodded modestly. I clapped along, used to being an afterthought in these family tributes. But then my father's gaze swept the room and landed on me, his expression changing subtly. "And then there is Marina," he said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. Something in his voice made the hairs on my neck stand up. The slight slurring of words, the edge of bitterness that most people would miss but that I recognized from countless family conflicts. "My daughter who chose to reject everything this family stands for." A murmur rippled through the room. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother's smile froze on her face. "You know, many of you have asked me over the years what Marina does," he continued, his voice growing harder. "I usually say she is a photographer. It sounds respectable enough. But the truth is, she turned her back on every opportunity, every advantage we provided." I sat perfectly still, blood rushing in my ears as my father continued his public dissection of my life choices. "We offered her the best education, the chance to do something meaningful with her life. Instead, she chose to take pictures." He practically spat the last words. "While her brother was studying 18 hours a day in medical school, she was off playing with cameras." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, frozen in place by the unexpected turn in what should have been a celebratory speech. "I have accomplished many things in my career," my father said, looking directly at me now, "but I have also failed in one significant way, and that failure is sitting at table 3. He raised his glass again, his hand slightly unsteady, to retirement, and to finally saying what I have thought for years. "Marina, you are the biggest disgrace to this family." The words hung in the air like smoke. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expressions ranging from shock to pity to morbid curiosity. My mother stared at her plate. James half rose from his seat, then sank back down, mouth open but silent. In that terrible moment of public humiliation, something strange happened inside me. Instead of crumbling, instead of fleeing the room in tears as the old Marina might have done, I felt an extraordinary calm descend. Years of therapy of building a life on my own terms of creating art that mattered had prepared me for exactly this moment of truth. My father had finally said aloud what had been implied my entire life. And in doing so, he had inadvertently set me free. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. My father remained at the podium, swaying slightly, the triumph of his pronouncement already fading into uncertainty as he registered the horrified expressions of his guests. This was not the reception he had expected for his moment of honesty. I became acutely aware of physical sensations. The tight grip of my fingers around my water glass. The press of the chair against my back. The weight of hundreds of eyes on me waiting for a reaction. The slight tremor in my hands that I forced to stillness through sheer will. Somewhere in the room, a glass clinked against a plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Someone coughed nervously. A chair scraped against the floor as someone shifted their weight. I had imagined this moment in various forms throughout my life. The public denouncement, the final rejection. In my imaginings, I had always crumbled tears streaming down my face as I begged for acceptance or fled in humiliation. But the reality was entirely different. Instead of devastation, I felt a strange clarity as though a fog had finally lifted. For years, I had contorted myself trying to earn a place in my family, while simultaneously building a life that contradicted their values. The cognitive dissonance had been exhausting. Now, with my father's public declaration, the pretense was over. There was nothing left to lose, no relationship left to preserve through careful diplomacy. I placed my napkin carefully on the table and stood. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. I smoothed the front of my jumpsuit and straightened my shoulders. Then I walked toward the podium, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor in the absolute silence. My father watched my approach with growing apprehension, perhaps only now realizing the magnitude of his actions. When I reached the front of the room, I turned to face the guests, rather than confronting him directly. "Good evening," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. For those who do not know me, I am indeed Marina Thompson, the family disgrace. A nervous titter ran through the crowd, quickly silenced. My father is right about one thing. I did choose a different path than the one laid out for me. I chose to pursue photography rather than medicine. To create rather than follow. To document the world as I see it, rather than conform to someone else's vision of success. I paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had known me only as Harold Thompson's enigmatic daughter. What my father failed to mention is that this disgraceful path has led me to publish work in National Geographic, The New York Times, and multiple international art journals. My photographs have been exhibited in galleries across 3 countries. Last year, I received the Emerging Documentary Photographer Award for my series on healthcare inequity, which ironically features several images from this very hospital's free clinic. I could see confusion on many faces. This did not match the narrative of the failed daughter they had just been presented with. But accolades are not why I chose this path. I chose it because it was authentic to who I am, just as medicine was authentic to my father and brother. The true disgrace would have been forcing myself into a mold that was never meant for me, living a life of quiet desperation while pretending to be someone I am not. My mother was staring at me now, her face unreadable. James looked both impressed and uncomfortable. My father's expression had shifted from righteous anger to something more complex. For decades, I have sought approval that was never going to come. I have stretched myself thin, trying to be both the daughter you wanted and the artist I am. Tonight has clarified things considerably. I turned to face my father directly now. You called me a disgrace to this family. I can see now that to you, that will always be true, because your definition of success is so narrow that it cannot accommodate difference. So yes, by your definition, I am a disgrace. And I finally accept that. I felt my voice gaining strength as years of suppressed thoughts found their release. Perfect, I continued, looking my father directly in the eyes. Then you can erase me from your will too. The words landed like a physical blow. My father's hand jerked and the champagne glass he had been clutching slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor with a crash that echoed through the silent room. The golden liquid spread across the polished wood like spilled possibilities. I never wanted your money. I said into the shocked silence that followed. I never wanted your connections or your influence or your approval that came with so many strings attached. All I ever wanted was for you to see me. Really see me not as a failed version of James or a disappointing extension of yourself, but as Marina. A person with different gifts, different passions, but no less valuable. My father's face had gone pale. He gripped the podium as though it was the only thing keeping him upright. That is all any child wants from their parent, I continued, my voice softening slightly. To be seen for who they are, not who the parent wishes they were. But you could never do that, could you? You could never see past your own rigid vision of success to recognize that I was succeeding in my own way. I addressed the room again, aware that this very public family drama had far exceeded the bounds of propriety that my parents valued so highly. I apologize to all of you for this uncomfortable situation. I know this is not what you expected from an evening celebrating a distinguished medical career, but perhaps there is something valuable in this moment of honesty after all. I looked at the faces around me, doctors and nurses and administrators who had dedicated their lives to healing. You all work in a profession that requires empathy, that demands seeing people as they are rather than as you wish them to be. You treat patients with different bodies, different histories, different needs. You adjust your approach based on the individual before you, not on some idealized version of what a patient should be. I turned back to my father. It is ironic that someone who spent his career seeing patients as individuals could never extend the same courtesy to his own daughter. The room remained utterly silent, collective breath held as this family drama played out before them. My mother had tears streaming silently down her face now. James was half standing again, seemingly torn between intervening and letting the scene play out. I did not come here tonight to cause a scene, I said, beginning to conclude. I came with hope for reconciliation, with a thoughtfully chosen gift, with an open heart. Despite years of evidence that it would likely be bruised again, I came because despite everything you are, my family and some childish part of me still hoped that might mean something. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a business card, placing it deliberately on the podium. This has my current contact information. The ball is in your court now. I will not chase approval anymore, but I remain open to a relationship based on mutual respect if you ever decide that is something you want. With that, I turned and walked steadily toward the exit, head held high despite the trembling that had begun in my limbs as the adrenaline surged through my system. The crowd parted before me like water faces blurring as I maintained my composure through sheer determination. Behind me, I heard the murmur of voices beginning to rise, the collective exhale of 200 people who had witnessed something raw and unscripted at what should have been a carefully orchestrated event. I heard my name spoken in hushed tones, felt the weight of stares on my back, but I did not falter in my deliberate path toward the door. Just as I reached the exit, I heard a chair scrape and footsteps hurrying after me. Kristen appeared at my side, her face a mixture of concern and fierce pride. I am coming with you, she said, simply taking my elbow in silent support. Together we pushed through the heavy doors and into the cool night air. Only then did my careful composure begin to crack, my breath coming in shallow gasps, as the magnitude of what had just occurred washed over me. My car is this way, Kristen said, gently guiding me across the parking lot. You were magnificent in there, Marina. Absolutely magnificent. In the safety of her car with the doors closed against the world, I finally allowed the tears to come. Not tears of shame or rejection, but of release, of letting go, of stepping fully into my own truth after years of trying to live in the shadow of someone else's expectations. Take me home, I whispered, not specifying whether I meant Kristen's house or my apartment in the city or some other place entirely. Home, I was beginning to understand, was not a physical location tied to family of origin. It was the space where you could be authentically yourself without apology. As we drove away from the country club, away from the shattered glass and stunned faces, I felt something shift inside me. The constant ache of seeking approval that had accompanied me for decades began to dissolve, replaced by a strange lightness that felt something like freedom. Kristen drove in silence, occasionally glancing at me with concern as I stared out the window, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred in my family dynamics. Streetlights swept across my face in rhythmic intervals, illuminating the tears that continued to fall despite my best efforts to contain them. Do you want to talk about it? She finally asked as we turned onto her street. Not yet, I replied, my voice hoarse. I just need to sit with it for a while. Inside her guest room, I mechanically removed my carefully chosen outfit and jewelry, replacing them with the soft pajamas I had packed. The contrast between my expectations for the evening and the reality was so vast that my mind struggled to bridge the gap. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, replaying the moment my father's words had cut through the pleasant hum of the party. The biggest disgrace to this family. The phrase echoed in my mind, familiar in sentiment, if not in exact wording. How many times had it been implied, if not stated so explicitly? How many disapproving looks and changed subjects and pointed comparisons to James had communicated the same message? Yet somehow hearing it stated plainly before witnesses had transformed it from a weight into a release. The secret family shame had been exposed to light, and in that exposure it had lost much of its power. My phone set on the nightstand began to vibrate with incoming messages. I glanced at the screen to see notifications from James, my mother, even distant relatives, who must have heard about the incident already. The family grapevine worked with impressive efficiency. I silenced the device without reading any of the messages. Whatever damage control they were attempting would have to wait. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay awake watching shadows move across the ceiling, sorting through memories with new clarity. The art show in 7th grade where my parents had arrived late and left early. The high school photography contest I had won, celebrated with a distracted all-end. That is nice, dear. While my mother prepared for James's academic decathlon dinner. The college graduation they had attended out of obligation, my mother asking on the drive home if I was finally ready to pursue something practical. Each memory, previously tinged with hurt and confusion, now appeared in a different light. It had never been about my failings. It had been about their inability to see value in anything that did not conform to their narrow definition of success. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee drifting under the door. I emerged from the guest room to find Kristen at her kitchen table scrolling through her phone with a concerned expression. It is all over social media, she said without preamble, turning her screen toward me. Someone at the party posted about it. I took the phone, stomach dropping, as I read a local community group post drama at Dr. Thompson's retirement party when he called his daughter a disgrace, and she delivered an epic clapback before walking out. Anyone know the full story? Sounds like some serious family issues. Dozens of comments followed, some from people who had been present, others speculating wildly based on rumor. My private family dysfunction had become public entertainment. I am so sorry, Marina, Kristen said, taking back her phone. People are the worst sometimes. It was a public event, I replied, reaching for the coffee pot, and I did choose to respond publicly. I just did not expect to be local gossip quite so quickly. What are you going to do now? I considered the question as I doctored my coffee with cream and sugar. I am going to finish this coffee, take a shower, and drive home. I said what needed to be said last night. The next move is theirs. You know you can stay longer if you need to, Kristen offered. Thank you, but I need to get back to my life. I have a client meeting on Monday and photos to edit. The normality of these tasks seemed surreal after the previous night's drama, but also necessary. Life continued regardless of family ruptures. As I packed my overnight bag, my phone began to ring. James's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Marina. His voice sounded rough, as though he had not slept either. Are you okay? Where are you? I am fine, I replied neutrally. I stayed at Kristen's. Last night was. He paused, seemingly at a loss for words. Illuminating, I supplied. Dad was drunk, James said quickly. He did not mean what he said. You know how he gets when he drinks too much. I closed my eyes, recognizing the familiar pattern of excuses we had all made for my father's behavior over the years. Actually, James, I think alcohol just removed his filter. He meant every word. A heavy silence filled the line. Maybe you are right, he finally conceded, his voice quieter. But your response. I have never seen you stand up to him like that. To any of us. It was overdue, I said simply. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him something. Listen. Mom and Dad are beside themselves. Mom has been crying all morning. Dad is locked in his study, refusing to speak to anyone. The hospital administrator called to express concern about the unfortunate incident. It is chaos. I am sorry for the fallout, I said, and meant it, but I am not sorry for what I said. Would you be willing to meet with me? Just me. Before you leave town, there are things I think we should talk about, sister to brother. The hesitancy in his voice, the unusual vulnerability caught me off guard. James and I had not had a real conversation in years. Had never openly discussed the family dynamics that had pushed us into our prescribed roles. When and where, I asked after a moment's consideration. The coffee shop on Elm. In an hour. I will be there. I finished packing, said goodbye to Kristen, with promises to call her later, and drove to the small independent coffee shop that had been my refuge during high school. It was strange to return now as an adult who had broken free of this town and its expectations. James was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 cups. He stood awkwardly as I approached, uncertainty written across features, so similar to my father's. I got you a latte, he said. You still drink those, right? I do, thank you. I sat across from him, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled appearance of his usually immaculate clothing. For several minutes, we sipped our coffee in uncomfortable silence, the weight of decades of complicated family history sitting between us like a third presence at the table. I owe you an apology, James finally said, staring into his cup rather than meeting my eyes. Many apologies, actually. I owe you an apologies. Actually. I waited, giving him space to continue. I knew how Dad treated you was wrong. I always knew, but it was easier to go along with it than to challenge it. Easier to accept the golden child role than to question why they treated us so differently. It was not your responsibility to fix their parenting, I said carefully. We were both children navigating a dysfunctional system. But I became complicit in it, he insisted, finally looking up. I enjoyed the approval, the attention. I let them diminish your accomplishments because it elevated mine by comparison. Even last night I sat there while Dad humiliated you publicly and did nothing. The admission hung between us, raw and honest, in a way our interactions had not been since childhood. Why medicine, James? I asked the question I had always wanted to pose but never dared. Was it truly your passion? Or was it the path of least resistance? He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, considering. Both, I think. I do love medicine. The problem-solving, the tangible results, the feeling of making a difference. But would I have chosen it without Dad's influence? Without the family legacy weighing on me, I honestly do not know anymore. And are you happy? Most days, he said after a pause. The work fulfills me, but the pressure never stops. Dad's standards became my standards. Nothing is ever quite good enough. There is always another publication to pursue, another grant to secure, another milestone to reach. The Thompson family curse, I said with a sad smile. Perpetual striving, never arriving. You broke free of it, he observed. That is what last night was really about, I think. Dad could not stand that you had charted your own course and found happiness outside the path he prescribed. I am not sure I have entirely broken free, I admitted. Part of me still showed up last night hoping for his approval, even after all these years of evidence that it would never come on my terms. James nodded in understanding. Your speech, though, that was something else. Half the hospital board members approached me afterward to say how impressed they were with your poise and clarity. Really, this surprised me. Really, Dr. Patel, the new chief of surgery, actually asked for your business card, said the hospital has been looking to commission a photographer for their new wing, and was impressed by your portfolio. A startled laugh escaped me. The irony. I know, James smiled, a genuine expression that reminded me of the brother I had played with before expectations and competition had driven us apart. Marina, I would like to know you better. The real you, not the version of you that exists in our parents' narrative. I want to see your work, understand your world. If you are willing. The offer was unexpected, a potential bridge across a chasm I had assumed was permanent. I would like that, I said cautiously. But it would require some ground rules. No comparisons, no subtle digs about my career choice, no suggestions about more practical paths. Agreed, he said quickly. And in return, I promise not to bore you with medical jargon or humble brag about procedures. The tension between us eased slightly, a tentative new understanding taking root. What about Mom and Dad? I asked the question that could not be avoided indefinitely. James sighed heavily. They are in damage control mode right now, more concerned about their social standing than the actual issues you raised. Mom keeps saying you made a scene and embarrassed the family. Dad is oscillating between anger and a weird, stunned silence. So nothing has really changed, I observed. Not yet, he conceded. But something changed in me last night watching you stand in your truth. It made me question how much of my life has been lived to please them, rather than to please myself. As we finished our coffee and prepared to part ways, James hesitated before asking, "Will you stay in touch this time?" Really stay in touch, not just holiday cards and obligatory calls. I will, I promised. But the relationship has to be built on who we actually are, not who our parents wanted us to be. I can work with that, he said, and pulled me into an awkward but genuine hug before we parted. Driving back to the city that afternoon, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The pain of my father's public rejection remained a bruise that would take time to heal. But alongside it grew something new. Not hope exactly, but a sense of possibility. The possibility that family relationships could evolve, that new connections could form from the ashes of old expectations. Most importantly, I felt the steady presence of my own voice finally expressed without apology or qualification. In standing up to my father, I had also stood up for myself in a way that felt transformative. Whatever came next, I would face it as the woman I had become, not as the daughter still seeking approval that would never come. The 3-hour drive back to my apartment gave me time to process the emotional whirlwind of the past 24 hours. Rain began to fall as I left the suburbs behind, matching my contemplative mood as I navigated the highway with music playing softly in the background. By the time I unlocked my door and dropped my overnight bag on the floor, exhaustion had overtaken me. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted well into the following day, my body and mind demanding recovery time from the emotional marathon I had run. When I finally awoke, sunlight streaming through the blinds I had forgotten to close, reality came rushing back. I reached for my phone, steeling myself for the barrage of messages that awaited. 27 missed calls, 42 text messages, 19 emails. The numbers themselves were overwhelming, a testament to how thoroughly I had shattered the careful facade my family had maintained for decades. I sorted through them, methodically creating mental categories as I went. There were outraged messages from my mother alternating between guilt trips. How could you humiliate your father this way? And damage control. The Richardsons are asking questions. What am I supposed to tell them? My father had not reached out directly, which was unsurprising. Several distant relatives and family friends had sent awkward messages expressing concern or offering unsolicited advice. Most unexpected were the messages from my father's colleagues. Dr. Patel, as James had mentioned, inquired about commissioning work for the hospital's new wing. An older nurse who had worked with my father for 20 years wrote simply, "I saw myself in your words last night. Thank you for your courage." A retired cardiologist who had been my father's mentor expressed both concern for the family situation and genuine interest in seeing my professional portfolio. The most important message, however, came from Sophia. "Whatever happened last night, I am here. No questions, no judgment, just support. Call when you can." I did call her, detailing the entire scene while she listened without interruption. When I finished, her response was characteristically direct. "So, you finally said the things you have been carrying for years. How does it feel?" "Terrifying," I admitted. "Liberating. Sad. All of it at once." "That sounds about right," she said. "The truth is messy, but necessary." Over the next few days, I threw myself back into work, finding solace in the familiar routine of editing sessions and client meetings. I responded selectively to messages engaging with James and a few others, while establishing firm boundaries with my mother's attempts to minimize what had happened. I am not ready to pretend everything is fine. I wrote to her after her third message suggesting we move past this unfortunate incident. What happened at the party was just the surface eruption of issues that have been building for decades. I need time and space to process, and I hope you and Dad will take time to reflect as well. A week after the party, I received a carefully worded email from my father. The formal tone and perfect grammar told me he had written and rewritten it multiple times, a stark contrast to his unfiltered outburst at the retirement celebration. "Marina," it began without greeting. "My behavior at the retirement party was unprofessional and inappropriate. The combination of alcohol and the emotional impact of ending my career led me to express myself in ways that were regrettable. I apologize for the public nature of my comments." I noted what the apology did not include any acknowledgement that the content of his comments was wrong, not just their delivery. Any recognition of the years of dismissal and disapproval that had led to that moment. Any genuine attempt to understand my perspective or experience as his daughter. I did not respond immediately, allowing myself time to consider what, if anything, I wanted from this fractured relationship moving forward. The answer came to me gradually over the following weeks. I wanted authenticity, even if that authenticity meant acknowledging that my father might never fully accept or understand my choices. My response when I finally sent it was brief but honest. "Thank you for your apology regarding the public nature of your comments. I remain open to conversation when you are ready to discuss the underlying issues that led to that moment. In the meantime, I am continuing to build my life and career in ways that bring me fulfillment." It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was an open door left ajar for him to walk through, if he ever chose to do so. Meanwhile, James surprised me by following through on his desire to understand my world better. He scheduled a video call to see my latest work, asking thoughtful questions about my creative process without a single comparison to medical achievements. We established a tentative tradition of Sunday morning coffee chats, gradually rebuilding a sibling relationship based on who we had become as adults, rather than the roles we had been assigned as children. During one such call, he shared that he had begun seeing a therapist to work through his own complicated feelings about our family dynamics. "I always thought I was the lucky one," he confessed. "The favored child who had it easy. But there were costs to that role that I am only now beginning to understand. The constant pressure to be perfect. The way my identity became so wrapped up in achievement and external validation. The golden cage," I suggested. "Exactly. Different from your experience, but still limiting in its own way." These conversations began to heal a rift I had assumed was permanent, creating space for a new kind of sibling relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. 3 months after the retirement party incident, a major arts magazine expressed interest in my ongoing project documenting family structures across different socioeconomic backgrounds. The irony of receiving professional recognition for work, exploring the very themes that had defined my personal struggles, was not lost on me. When the feature was published, I sent copies to my family without commentary. James called immediately with genuine congratulations. My mother sent a brief text acknowledging that the photos were very professional looking. My father did not respond directly, but 2 weeks later I received a clipping from the local newspaper in my hometown. A small article mentioned that Dr. Harold Thompson had proudly displayed his daughter's magazine feature in his home office, a detail that must have been shared during some social gathering. It was a tiny gesture so small it might have seemed insignificant to anyone else. But I recognized it for what it was. The first fragile tendril of acceptance extended across the divide that had separated us for so long. 6 months after the retirement party, I returned to my hometown for the first time since that night. James and Diana had invited me for a weekend visit, a deliberate attempt to create new positive associations with a place that held so many difficult memories. During that visit, I agreed to a brief, carefully orchestrated dinner with my parents. The conversation remained superficial, focusing on neutral topics and avoiding any mention of the retirement party confrontation. Yet, something had shifted subtly. My father asked one question about my recent photography assignment, making brief eye contact before quickly changing the subject. My mother mentioned a childhood friend who had seen my magazine feature and been impressed. Small moments, tiny acknowledgments, but worlds away from where we had been. As the 1-year anniversary of the retirement party approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed both externally and internally. My career had flourished with new opportunities opening up, partly due to the connections made ironically through my father's colleagues. My relationship with James had evolved into something genuine and supportive. My parents and I maintained careful contact, neither fully reconciled nor completely estranged. But the most significant changes had occurred within me. The constant anxiety that had been my companion since childhood, the perpetual feeling of not measuring up, had diminished significantly. I no longer evaluated my success against an impossible standard set by someone else's values. I had learned to validate my own choices, to recognize my own achievements, without needing external approval to make them real. In therapy, I had begun to understand that my father's inability to accept my path had never been about my inadequacy but about his own rigid worldview and unresolved issues. This understanding did not erase the hurt of years of rejection, but it helped me carry it differently with compassion rather than shame. I had also discovered the power of chosen family. The friends who had rallied around me after the retirement party incident, who had created space for my grief and celebrated my professional successes, had shown me that meaningful connection was possible without the conditions that had characterized my family relationships. One evening, as I was preparing for a new exhibition featuring work that explored themes of identity and belonging, I received an unexpected message from my father. Unlike his previous formal communications, this one was brief and seemingly written in haste. Saw announcement of your upcoming exhibition. Planning to attend if that would be acceptable to you. I stared at the screen for a long time, emotions swirling as I considered the significance of this request. My father, who had never shown interest in my work, was asking permission to enter my world on my terms. It was not an apology or a full reconciliation, but it was movement. A step toward seeing me as I was, rather than as he had wished me to be. My reply was equally brief. Yes, that would be acceptable. Details attached. Thank you for asking. I did not know what would happen at that exhibition, whether this tentative bridge building would continue or collapse under the weight of years of hurt and misunderstanding. But I knew that whatever happened, I would face it as the woman I had become. A woman who had learned that standing in her truth, however difficult, was the only path to authentic connection and inner peace. The journey from being the family disappointment to becoming my own measure of success had been painful and complicated. There were no perfect resolutions, no magical moments of complete healing, just small steps toward greater authenticity, both within myself and in my relationships with others. As I curated photographs for the exhibition, selecting images that told stories of belonging and alienation, connection and isolation, I realized that my personal experience had deepened my art in ways I could never have anticipated. The very pain that had once seemed only destructive had become transformative, informing my vision and strengthening my voice. The biggest disgrace to the family had become, ironically, someone I was proud to be. Someone who had found the courage to break free of limiting expectations and forge her own path. Someone who had learned that true family, whether biological or chosen, was built on acceptance, rather than conditions on seeing, rather than shaping on love that embraced difference, rather than demanding conformity. Have you ever had to choose between being who others wanted you to be and being true to yourself? What would you have done in my situation at that retirement party? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more authentic conversations about family dynamics and finding your own path. And if you know someone struggling with family expectations, consider sharing this video. Sometimes knowing we are not alone in these experiences can make all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see your unique gifts.